Hello. My name is Robert Howard, Dr. Robert Howard. I am a professor at Norwalk Community College, and I will be the professor for the teacher for this course of World Civilization, the first of two World Civilization courses that we teach at NCC. I'd like to welcome you to the course. Some of you may be just beginning in college, some of you may be returning. It's been a hectic period of time. I am teaching online because I am certainly a member of the high risk group when it comes to COVID 19. And so this is why I am teaching indeed all of my courses this fall semester of 2020 online. Okay, so this is a history course. I wonder how many of you actually hate history? Your experiences of history have been pretty brutal, miserable, memorizing lists of names and dates and things like that. I don't tend to teach history from that point of view. I sort of prefer to teach history as an exercise in understanding the background and context of human behavior that leads to the present moment and the world that we live in. Increasingly, then, history has tried to incorporate larger and larger frameworks so that we now have a world civilization course, which in some respects is an impossibility. I will admit it from the start. There's no way that you can cover world civilization with the degree of accuracy and precision and getting down into the details that you can when you do what you usually do, say with American history. So, American history might look at the period from the beginning of colonization, 1619, whatever date you want to take, and carrying it through the American Revolution, Constitution, events during the 19th century, expansion, westward expansion, leading up to the Civil War. And most courses probably end there at the Civil War with a brief view of what's called Reconstruction and the attempt to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. But Humpty Dumpty does resist in a sense, and so Reconstruction does not fulfill the promises that it made to the freed blacks. All of this, right? But understand that even though that seems to be a relatively long period of time in which we're looking at a lot of details, the truth of the matter is you can get more deeply into specific aspects of it. And well, we're looking at something that's going to cover a period that runs from, say, 5,000 years ago till, more or less Columbus's discovery of the New World, even though discovery is a term that is quite questionable in this regard. There were quite a number of humans who were here already who knew about it and had settled it and developed civilization, but don't get involved in that right now. My suggestion is that given the broad range geographically, we're talking about the whole globe, and the time span, it's really hard to do this course perhaps in the way that you're used to most history courses doing it and picking out an isolated event and looking at letters and other kinds of documents and newspaper reports, whatever period of time you're looking at, and to try and penetrate more deeply into the motivations of the time, perhaps some of the cultural background, all of those different kinds of things. That gets kind of hard in this context. But I would also suggest something that is fundamentally important here. This is more, certainly at the start, more of an interdisciplinary course, albeit history, an interdisciplinary course because it relies on information that comes from a variety of sources. Let's start with the word history. You kind of I assume, maybe I shouldn't assume for you, but I assume that most of you, use the word history to mean things that happened in the past. When a young woman is asked about a boyfriend and she goes, he's history, we know what that means. Equally, if a man were asked about a past girlfriend and said, she's history, well, we understand that that's finished, that's done with, I've moved on, I'm into different things. So that literally, then, there, the word history is kind of a metaphor for anything that happened in the past, right? Well, with history, we have prehistory. How could you have history and prehistory? Well, you all know that the word pre refers to something that happened before. So that prehistory must, in effect, refer to aspects of human behavior that happened before. But before what then? I suppose is the first question you want to ask if someone said, okay, this is a course in prehistory. Okay, what is the dividing line? Well, effectively, the dividing line between the study of history in this context, not in my office here with my books and stuff around me, no, not in this context, but in the context of what we refer to as academia, which is college and above, higher education, academia. And so, in that context, in the context of academia, the word history refers to a specific discipline that is an evidence based discipline that attempts to decipher and understand events of the human past. But please, God, I can't believe it. There it is. I'm getting older. Okay. The expression I use with my other history courses, for example, if I teach Western Civ, one of the things that I insist that students understand is the expression, know thy sources. Because history, as an academic discipline, is based on sources. And effectively, the sources that are the primary treasure trove, the area for analysis for historians, are written documents. So, what does that mean? Writing is not a precondition of human existence. Humans can exist in the absence of writing. Societies can exist. Communities can exist in the absence of writing. And indeed, as we will see when we get into this a little bit further on, but when we get into this, we will see that humans have been around for perhaps 150,000 to 200,000 years. There are those that would move it and make it somewhat shorter than that, 125, even 100,000 years ago. But based on the information that we have, it seems like we could push back the presence of Homo sapiens, which is to say the exact species of humanity, present-day humanity, Homo sapiens sapiens. We can push that back to at least 150,000, if not 200,000 years ago. So these were human beings. As we'll see, they had language, but they didn't have writing. So if they don't have writing, what records do they leave of their actions, of their society, of their religion, of their beliefs, of their sense of self-identity, of their understanding of the universe at large? What do they leave us? That is the issue that will separate prehistory from history, and it will separate two separate academic disciplines from each other. So history is the study of human behavior, institutions, conflicts, all of the stuff that history gives us once writing appears. And writing is going to appear, as we will see, in Egypt and Mesopotamia about 5,000 years ago, something like that. Now, there may be some sort of, obviously, incipient early forms of writing that go back a little bit further. And the Chinese claim that there are indications of people writing stuff down in China earlier than that, but nothing in terms of a truly serious writing system emerges until both Mesopotamia and Egypt, more or less simultaneously, perhaps Mesopotamia before Egypt, but we'll look at that, right? Develop a system of writing. At that point in time, you have people writing down things. As we'll see, when we look at Egypt and Mesopotamia, they tend to write down different things, particularly in the beginning periods of time, where writing develops in response to sort of different conditions in these two societies. Hold on to that. This is just an introductory lecture to get you started, right? Okay. So 6,000 years ago, no humans had any system of writing that we can refer to, point to. Were there humans? Did they form groups, communities? Did they engage in technical advances? Did they engage in growth and development, rituals, religion, beliefs, these kinds of things? Well, we certainly assume they did. They had, of course, spoken language. And let me make this a point of this very first introductory lecture. Spoken language is a universal characteristic of every group that we have encountered on the planet today. My own particular discipline as a cultural anthropologist, although I do historical ethnography, my own discipline has gone out and has, in effect, worked in all of these groups hidden here and there in small islands and forests and things like that. And they all have their own complete language, which at times, interestingly enough, is more complex than our own languages. Even though we kind of assume that, we are more civilized and we have this certain cultural arrogance, if you will. But you go out there and you study these languages, and there's one anthropologist who went out and studied the Navajo language, and he said, when it comes right down to it, Navajo is a much superior language for expressing the theory of relativity of Einstein, because their language has relativity built into it. I have no idea what he means. I don't know the language. I don't intend to study it. I don't have that many years left of life that I could actually sit down and study Navajo and really begin to understand it well enough to be able to say that. But it's an interesting assertion that a person who had dedicated years to studying and understanding the language, going out and talking to the people, could, because he was also educated in other areas and understood the implications of Einstein's theory of relativity, could see in a language like the Navajo language something that is better than English, with its kind of linear development of time, present, past, future kinds of ways of dividing up the temporal scale, if you will. In any case, what's my point? My point is every human group has a spoken language, which anthropologists will tell us, anthropological linguistics that has studied these languages will tell you their language is adequate and more than adequate for expressing the world that they live in. It is a true reflection of and a technique as well to help them understand and analyze the world they live in, both naturally in terms of nature itself, but also physically as well. Okay, so we have history. History cannot begin until that point in time in which writing exists. So if we go back 5,000 years ago, this course really sort of begins 5,000 years ago, but it has 1 foot in the period before that as a framing device in preparation for what will come later. What is the discipline that deals with what we call human prehistory? It's the discipline known as archaeology. At Norwalk Community College, we have Ernie Wiegand, is our local archaeologist who goes around and supervises digs, excavations in different areas here in Connecticut, looking for traces of colonial, pre-colonial Indian civilizations as they existed. And so prehistory then is the discipline designed to expand our understanding of human activity beyond the simple limitations of using writing as a cutoff device for when human civilization, human behavior is open to inspection. Well, if they don't have writing, what do they look at? The word there, the operative word there is artifact, and what archaeologists do is they go to places and they do sort of test digs to test whether in that earth there may be some. If you go down, you may come across elements of earlier human civilizations, because the way archaeologist works, just like the geologist, the surface of the earth is the newest, and as you go down deeper into the earth, you're going back in time. Well, the same thing is true of, and we'll see this certainly when we're looking at the Middle East, where in areas like Iraq, Palestine, Israel, those areas of the world have got what are called tells, which are sort of appear to be hillsides in the countryside, but they're literally garbage dumps from people having lived there for thousands of years, and so have built on the past and created a hump on the horizon that, if you're not an astute archaeologist, you drive by and you probably wouldn't look at it, but just, oh, interesting, a hill. But it turns out that hill may well contain the remains of a city mentioned in the past but disappeared in time, and there it is. And so you go down into it, and of course, we don't want to get too deeply into this, but obviously the archaeologist has to try and control for time and contemporaneous events. And so when they dig down, they develop layers. And each layer represents a certain time horizon. And the deeper you go back in the past, the deeper you go down in the ground, the further back into the past you go, right? But you have to be able to. So in other words, if I create something like this in the hill, and then I go down underneath it, there's another one like this, I am able to see that an object over here at this level in this layer is contemporaneous to an object in the same level all the way over here on the other side of the hill, which would be the other side of town, if you will. But they occurred at the same time, right? And so you can use that anyway. This is, and as I suggest, archaeology is a large, complex discipline that in many respects is an interdisciplinary discipline, because archaeology will rely on physics to help them date things and stuff like that, right? And so certainly when we're looking at the origins of civilization, or as we are in this course, in areas like Mesopotamia, Egypt, when we jump into China, when we jump into South America, right? When we're looking at those kinds of issues, the work of the archaeologist is a fundamental source. But remember what I said at the start: know thy sources. So what the archaeologist is working with is a series of objects that refers to as artifacts that then have to be interpreted. They have to be made to speak for the people of the past. And of course, in reality, they are mute, but archaeologists have developed incredible techniques And archaeology and indeed modern anthropology that has gone out and studied hunting gathering groups um, sort of cross fertilize each other. That archaeologist has questions about objects and how they're used and this kind of a thing and whatever, so that the anthropologist who's going out to live with and study the life ways of a hunting gathering people who practice a way of life that would have existed 7, 8, 10, 12,000 years ago, carries with him or her the questions that the archaeologist has. Um, Hence, there is that cross fertilization. A third area of interest here is what we might want to call biological anthropology. Because if, as we see in the opening chapter of the book, we see human history as a later stage in the process and growth of development of the human species per se, well, then we get into evolutionary considerations, right? And if you're going to do evolution and evolutionary considerations, then you do need to refer to a subfield of anthropology, which is called biological anthropology. Now, for all of these areas, there are different databases involved. In other words, what each of these separate disciplines is looking for is different. Where they go to answer the questions may be the same, but the databases are different, and where they go to answer those questions, hence, will be different. History looks at writing, prehistory looks at artifacts, objects that remain from past civilizations. Physical anthropologists look at fossil remains. Indeed, your textbook gives you a picture of Lucy, a very, very famous fossil remain. Okay, as we go back into the past, what's going to happen? That database shrinks and gets smaller and smaller. So for a field like physical anthropology, a single new find can have immense implication. Perhaps not revolutionary, but certainly large-scale implications in the discipline itself, right? History, as we come closer and closer to the present, what's happened? An explosion of information, right? When you go back to the Greeks and you look at the Greeks, well, there might be 20 books that you have to read from that period, which in effect constitute our sources for what we are looking at. You go back to Mesopotamia, you go back to Egypt, it gets even more restricted. And indeed, the work of the archaeologists will continue past the invention of writing because so much of Egyptian history is buried in the sands of time, as is Mesopotamia. So keep that in mind then. Now, for this course, there are 2 textbooks, Worlds Together, Worlds Apart, Volume 1, written by a team of experts out of Princeton University. It is a rather high-quality textbook. Leaving that aside for a second, and I realize it can be a little bit expensive, but I do think it's a good textbook. Leaving that aside for a second, they have taken an approach to history that it could be said that there are 2 separate ways of approaching world civilization. In the past, I've used another textbook that used the first way. And the first way of doing it is isolate off a significant area. China, for example. Okay, and pick up on China 2,000 years before BC and follow it through a series of dynasties and changes and cultural inventions and, Confucianism and back and forth, and so you get a good overview of China across time and internally as well, right? As you see sort of the flow of challenges and countervailing ideas developing in response. And so That way of creating a textbook would sort of create, if you will, chapters on China, chapters on the Middle East, chapters on Europe, and so you follow through over time with them. Has some benefits. The flow of events across time in a specific area are presented in a way that enables you to follow the growth and development within a place like China, India. Well, India is subdivided into so many different cultural areas and groups, it's even hard from that point of view. The second way of developing a textbook, which is the technique used by the authors of this book, is we are looking at contemporaneous events across the globe. What's happening virtually at the same time across the globe. That technique is better, as you will see, in connecting what happens here with what's happening over there, right? And so rather than isolating one place off and following it through 1,500, 2,000 years, we look at the flow of civilization in different areas. Keep that in mind as you approach the textbook. It's a different way of looking at it. I would also suggest that the textbook has some features that are worthy of looking at. If you're going to do the textbook seriously, the introduction to the textbook contains outlines, the critical questions that the textbook is going to address in this particular chapter. It's a way that really helps you analyze before you get into the material, and you should sort of do a looping. Start there, look at those things, get an idea of what the chapter is about, then read it, then go back and say, did I really understand it? And then look in terms of the questions it has. The second point I would like to make about the textbook is they have spent a lot of time and energy on developing maps. These textbooks from this particular series have some of the most thoughtful and useful maps I have seen in the different textbooks that I've used. They are complex, and they require you to sit and focus and look at the guide that says, okay, this is referring to this, right? For example, scarce resources. Okay, iron was coming from here, gold was coming from here, whatever it is, right? But you really have to sort of study the maps. You can't just glance at them. And I would hope, since this is a world civilization course, that you take geography seriously. And indeed, world geography is another element of this course that is a critical part of its interdisciplinary focus here. Okay, the next thing I want to say is there is a second book. It's not a textbook, but it's a reader that I will coordinate with you. And it's Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. I don't have you read the whole book, okay, because it's rather a long book, and how much time do we have in this course? And I realize you've got busy lives and other courses you're taking. But Guns, Germs, and Steel is very well written and is an excellent analysis of elements involved with the growth of agriculture and domestication of plants and animals. It is one of the best analysis around there in one place that really lays out so much of the elements involved. The author himself is a geographer, as well as having other specialties. He's truly an interdisciplinary kind of a person. So the book is extremely valuable from that point of view. I will ask you to focus on the areas that I think are of most concern here. They're most germane to understanding the process of moving from hunting-gathering to agriculture, which is possibly the single most important revolutionary change introduced into human history and society. Okay, we'll leave it here, and we'll make this our first hello, how are you, introduction. So you get an idea of what the course is like. Um, I will have to, in the next lecture like this, give you some more details as to what your responsibilities in the course will be so that I understand that you are concerned with how you're going to get a grade in the course, what requirements there are. But let me say thank you, and hopefully we'll get a chance to see each other through Zoom during the period of the course itself. So I'm going to end it here.